welcome to the Wine Access Unfiltered podcast. Over the last few episodes, we've talked a lot about what's on the label, right? Grapes, regions, winemaking styles, and how that translates into the glass so that you can be the savviest wine buyer that I know that you can be. But today, we're talking about something that's not often on the label, but is arguably the most important aspect of any wine, and that is the farming. We're going to be touching on everything from old vines and organic farming to what you should be paying attention to on the label. And just like how we were trying to figure out what's on the label and how that translates into the glass, we're talking about how farming translates into the glass. I'm sure you've all looked a little perplexed when someone talks about things like low yields or how they're no longer tilling in the vineyard and went, okay, so what? What does that all mean? Why should I care? So this episode is going to focus on farming and the farmers. And I think a lot of us in the industry think that the farmers are the backbone of this industry. You know, we talk a lot about winemakers and they get their 100-point scores. And even in Napa Valley, you've got chefs who get Michelin stars. But sort of the unsung heroes of Napa Valley are our farmers. We would not have any of what we have in Napa Valley or the entire wine industry without them. And I am very excited today because I get probably the most qualified person to talk about grape growing and farming and how it all translates. And with me today is Caleb Mosley, the executive director at the Napa Valley Grapegrowers. He's got a crazy long history of not only working with some of the most prestigious vines and vineyards in California, but he also is someone who grew up on the land. Whenever someone asks me, what's the best way to learn about wine? I always say, well, go to a wine region, live in a wine region if you can. And Caleb's kind of done that his entire life and continues to do that today. So please welcome to the show, Caleb Mosley. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Amanda, thanks so much for having me on. This is such an honor to be on here with you, and I can't wait to get into farming with you.
I know. I'm very excited. Farming is one of those things that I think I understood in books, but didn't really understand at all until I started living on the land. I know you've worked at some of the best, right? You've worked for Ridge with the legendary Paul Draper and I'm so jealous, the Montebello Vineyard, along with David Gates as well. In 2011, you were at the Arajo Estate working with Steve Mathiasen and Bob Gallagher, Quintessa and Rutherford, and worked for Michael Wolff, who we all know and love as one of the leading viticulturists in the Valley. And then before you stepped into your role at the Grapegrowers, you were at a little known place called Mathiasen. And you've sort of seemed to have found yourself at some of the best vineyards in California, but also vineyards that really put farming first. And I assume that's not an accident.
No, that's the ethos. And I think that's what you taste in the finished wines. It's interesting. A lot of the conversations you have at estates like this talk about consistency over time. And, you always have to adapt your farming practices to the given year, but you have a standard that you set for what you're trying to do in each of these different locations. And when you taste, like going back to Ridge Montebello, there's a thread of continuity from each vintage after vintage. And that comes from farming, basically farming based on the season, but also farming about what you know about the land and kind of having a longer lens, if you will, not making reactive changes year in, year out to really drastically change the way that you farm, but to stick with what you know works for that particular site. And I've had a lot of really humbling moments farming, trying to go against that ethos of saying, well, I'm going to fix this, I'm going to change this right away. When it's really a long-term process in farming and you really have to be nuanced and understand from start to finish to be able to craft these wines and make sure that when the fruit makes it into the winery, it's going to show the way that the vineyard wants to be expressed.
Yeah, Mother Nature will not be bending to your will. You bend it to hers. And I'm sure that's
absolutely true.
I'm sure that's something as a farmer, as a viticulturist that is probably something difficult to work with, but also something kind of beautiful. I wonder, growing up in Santa Cruz, it sounds like your father worked the vineyards there. You guys grew up on a vineyard. How much did that inform what you are doing now?
It was incredibly informative, whether I knew it or not. When you're waking up before school and popping out to go harvest in the morning, you kind of understand, you start to live the cadence of the vines, the cycle of the year is kind of ingrained in you. You don't get that with many other types of careers unless you're working in agriculture in some way, shape, or form. Of course, there's cyclical natures to everything that we do, but everything is so determined by the weather and by the growing state of the vines themselves. So when you're out walking around, you just start to absorb it on your own, or just walking out through the vineyard, you start to notice things like, wow, the canopies look great this year. They don't look great this year. You pick up on these little cues and nuances as you continue through the growing season. So it's just a phenomenal way to kind of immerse yourself wholly in it, and before you even know what you're doing. But yeah, smelling, the smells of the crews getting up and going in the morning, the tractors running, the fruit making its way in, rain on the soil, learning about erosion, learning about land stewardship, all those things come with farming. It's not just grapes. You're always thinking about kind of the holistic picture.
I listened to a podcast that you did with our mutual friend, Jim Dwayne from CV Vineyard. It's a great podcast if anyone really wants to geek out into the winemaking side of things. It's called Inside Winemaking. But I loved sort of in the beginning, you talked about how you would purposefully go to school with like little bits of Cabernet on your shirt, like as a fourth grader, which made me laugh out loud, but also was just so telling of like someone that really, it seemed like you wanted to do this from an early age, or at least be involved in it in some way.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was a bit of, I felt very honored, if you will, special, unique, different to show up to school with a little bit of wine stain on a white shirt, which, I don't really have too many white things anymore because they don't last that long, whether it's dirt or wine or whatever it may be. That's just kind of life and how I go. But yeah, no, it was something unique. And I remember also my dad coming in quite frequently for, teaching the kiddos, hey, bringing in some grape samples and things like that, which is actually what we're trying to do more with the Napa Valley Grapegrowers as well, is get out into the community and make sure that the different generations and different people understand how important farming is to our overall community in Napa. So communication about farming and about how beautiful the life is and the career path is really, really important to get people excited about continuing their craft out in the vineyard.
Yeah, I think so too. And I almost wish that from an earlier age, I had recognized the importance of farming. Getting into wine in my mid to late 20s, I was really kind of focused on the winemaking side of things. I was focused on how the wines were translating in glass, but I really didn't understand the farming aspect of it, like I said, until I moved out to Napa. So I think the earlier you can feel it and breathe it and see it and kind of live like the grapes are living and get a firsthand touch, the easier it becomes.
The fascinating part as well is that we're in the midst, I think, of a cultural shift in how we think about almost everything. And especially our food and our wine and what we're drinking and what we're putting in our bodies. And I think that's where you really start to pay attention to farming practices, and people are getting more interested in what growers are doing to cultivate their vines year in, year out. So we're seeing that all over the place with different kind of conversations about, we talked a little bit about tilling. Are you tilling or are you not tilling? What are all the myriad of reasons why or why not to till in a vineyard? And there's right and wrong reasons for every practice that you do. The beautiful part about growers here in Napa is that there's no decision that's taken lightly.
Right.
Every year, those decisions are just scrutinized and, why are we turning over the soil this year? What implement are we using? What's the plan in 2 or 3 years? Again, the time frame of how we're thinking about what we're doing in terms of our management practices is absolutely impressive. So we can get into that, I'm sure, a little bit later too, in terms of what we're doing. And we've got some, incredible wines here to kind of help tell that story as we keep going too.
We absolutely do. So I'm going to we normally jump into what's going on in the wine world, which I guess this sort of falls under the category of, but let's talk about what's happening directly in Napa Valley with a little something called Harvest Stomp. So I mentioned Caleb is the executive director for the Napa Valley Grapegrowers, which is a 501c3 in Napa Valley. And in partnership with our Farm Workers Foundation, which is also a 501c3, there's an event that happens every year called Harvest Stomp. It is truly one of the things that I am most excited to take part in a very, very small way. I basically just show up and pour wine, but I get to be there and I get to be...
That is not just what you do.
No, it is. It is. You guys do all the hard work. We have such a great time doing it. And obviously the people that go have a great time. But more importantly, this is something that raises money and raises awareness for 2 incredible organizations that support this valley in one of the most instrumental ways. So I wonder, before we talk about the auction, because there's an incredible way that people who are listening can get involved, if you can just talk a little bit about what the Grapegrowers and the Farm Workers Foundation do and how it impacts the valley.
Yeah, absolutely. The Napa Valley Grapegrowers have been around since 1975, which is just remarkable to think about any organization that's around for 50 years. We cultivate viticultural excellence and environmental stewardship for the Napa Valley. Our organization provides education, resources, tools, seminars for our growers here to make sure that we're constantly at the cutting edge and that we have all the information that we need to continually navigate challenges year in, year out, whether it's climatic changes, whether it's changes with the workforce, whether it's challenges in terms of irrigating vines, using new technology in the vineyards. We have so many different challenges. Farming is one of the most difficult crafts you could possibly ever get into, and you feel like you're barely in control most of the time. We have major issues right now in Napa and other growing regions in the state of California and beyond with red leaf viruses that essentially modify the physiology of the vines so they're not producing sugars and not producing color. So we're focusing on a deep dive at our rootstock convention, which is coming up, a rootstock seminar coming up later in November after harvest when we're all ready to learn a little bit more. This year, we'll be talking about red leaf viruses from the wine perspective, from the viticultural perspective, from the pathogen management perspective, from the insect control perspective. It's all interrelated and all exceptionally important. So this is the breadth of what we do. We've also just hosted our organic wine growing conference, which is one of a kind. There's only one other that we know of on the planet, which occurs in New Zealand I believe they're at every year now. We do it every other year. But we actually hosted our keynote speaker at Frog's Leap Winery,
which we'll be drinking later.
Here. Yeah. So essentially championing every kind of growing practice as long as they're cognizant of what they're doing and how their practices are impacting the final wine quality, environment, and everything of that nature. So that's the Napa Valley Grapegrowers. And then our sister organization, if you will, is another 501c3 called the Napa Valley Farm Worker Foundation, which is an exceptionally important component of the success of our valley overall. They do all sorts of amazing educational programs and career advancement programs that I've sent crews to over the entire course of my career here in Napa. Some of the most impressive ones have been leadership coaching classes. Cultivar is their larger kind of in conjunction with Rootstock. Cultivar is hosted by the Farm Worker Foundation, and there's all sorts of classes about just leadership and management and all sorts of ways that that crews can advance themselves and understand how to navigate all sorts of various situations in the vineyard. So both organizations are doing incredible work to support farm workers, to support growers. We feel like we're unique in Napa and that there's really no other growing region with two other organizations like this that do work essentially hand in hand on the benefit the entire valley, to benefit all the wineries, to benefit our growers, to benefit our farm workers. The work that we're doing has a major impact, and we're just so blessed to have a fundraiser like Harvest Stomp around the corner to be able to raise funds for these really lofty needs.
Well, and you get everyone to show up because everyone in the valley knows that you do not get great wine without great grapes, and you only get great grapes by farming them to the highest standards. So to that end, you've gotten a lot of really incredible people involved in the event. And the event is an in-person event that people, it's ticketed, right? I think you have to be invited to go to the actual one. But for those who are listening, there is an e-auction that you can be involved with that is actually going to start right after. If you're listening to this episode in real time, this auction is going to begin on the 17th of August in 2024 and go through August 22nd of 2024. So you can actually bid on some of these items. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of people in the valley who get involved with this.
We actually take over a vineyard site, and we're in the middle of the vineyard hosting 400 to 500 people or so out in the vineyard with a live auction, which is stacking up to be incredible right now as well.
I love not to interrupt you, but the rodeo guys that come in and do the auction is my favorite part when they like have their hats and they're like going crazy. It is the most fun that I have in a night.
Yeah, they're amazing. It is just the highest energy, but also the most grounding experience you can have because your feet are actually like in the soil vineyard. And you're surrounded by vines. Yeah, it's the whole reason for doing this. So yeah, it's really unique. And we basically build this whole event from the ground up. This year it'll be hosted at Viña Esperanza, which is up in Calistoga. So it's kind of the furthest away that we've traveled thus far. But it's kind of getting into the outer reaches, and there's some outer reaches of the valley, not just in the heart, which is a really important part of our valley overall. There's some incredible wines made in all the nooks and crannies. The Isley Vineyard in Calistoga being one of those incredible places. There's a lot of incredible e-auction items that'll be up for grabs starting on the 17th. We have a really amazing partnership. We're so thankful for the folks at Scarecrow and my former boss, Michael Wolf, along with the proprietors of Scarecrow and Celia Welsh. We have a vineyard walk and a 2-liter bottle of 2012 Scarecrow.
Wow.
To go along with that. So I don't know what's more valuable, the wine or the time that you'll get to spend with Mike walking amongst the vines. It's such an amazing property. It's such an amazing place. Once in a lifetime opportunity for a tour through the vineyard with Mike, and then a sit down tasting for 6 at the property, which
cool.
is just a gem. It's amazing. But there's all sorts of other really amazing offerings. Andy Erickson and Andy Favia have an amazing tour of their property in Coombsville, along with a tasting of teas and kind of a look at what they're doing in Coombsville. So again, another really great appellation. There's just so much in the e-auction. It's hard to kind of pick any out, but I really also want to talk about a kind of a new development in the e-auction landscape for us, which is kind of the keys to Napa Valley. So a lot of the AVA groups wanted to get on board and support the Napa Valley Grapegrowers and the Farm Worker Foundation this year. So we have these keys to Napa Valley lots with 5 different appellations: Rutherford, Coombsville, Calistoga, Oakville, and Howell Mountain. They've all put together incredible Magnum packages and 750 packages, along with tickets to their annual AVA tasting events.
Cool.
So it's a really big deal. The wines are phenomenal. There's maps that go along with some of the packages. Really wanting to get a deep dive into what these AVAs are all about. So the other really amazing pieces of this are some travel packages. Calistoga to Tahoe, the Palisades package would be one I'd recommend checking out. We've got some great experiences. Have you been to the Calistoga lighted tractor parade before, Amanda?
I have never made it to the I don't know how I've missed it. I think it was because I was always working and then it was COVID and whatever. But no, but I've only ever heard amazing things.
It's incredible. It is one of the most family-friendly and joyful moments you'll find in December every year in Calistoga. They shut down the main street, and we have a opportunity from to ride the fire truck as through the middle of town.
Oh my gosh, I need this. If someone wants to bid on this on my behalf, please, by all means, that would be very exciting.
Yeah, I would highly recommend checking that one out if you're in town in December. But the wine packages are just amazing, and the experiences are amazing as well. So the e-auction is shaping up to be just incredible and will be really impactful for our organization.
Definitely. Yeah, that Scarecrow package is, to just taste Scarecrow is a once in a lifetime experience, but also to walk those vineyards, vineyard, is just something that you don't get to do. It's private. They don't invite people all the time, but they're really, really special old vines that you get to see. And then I love that Annie and Andy are involved. I love both of them tremendously. And if you've never had the chance to taste Annie's teas, they're organically grown teas that she grows right on the vineyard. So I think it's it's prized tea from Coombsville. So you can get prized grapes from Coombsville. You can get prized teas from Coombsville. So very, very cool. If anyone is looking to get involved, I will list everything in the description below. You can find everything you need on harveststomp.com. That includes the e-auction. That includes ways to donate to both 501c3s if you are just looking to support both causes. And I encourage you to do that because, as Caleb said, these are incredibly instrumental organizations, not only to Napa Valley, but also to the wine industry at large. So if you are a wine drinker, a wine lover, this is a way that you can support the industry and know that your money is going to a great place that really is pushing new levels within our community.
The proceeds are also shared 50-50 between the Farm Worker Foundation and the Napa Valley Grapegrowers. So everything is split evenly. Helps us both continue our missions here in Napa.
I love the sustainable, holistic approach to charitable giving. It's a great. I mean, we talk a lot about and we'll talk about when we get into the next section of the podcast. But we talk a lot about not just treating the vines, treating everything around that. I think you guys working in tandem with each other is a perfect example of how two very important things working together make an incredibly strong bond and make for just a better industry and better wine, which we all can get on board with, I think.
Absolutely.
You guys who are listening and part of the podcast wine club, we are going to be jumping into that wine in just a second. In your shipment, you should have this really beautiful bottle of Bedrock Nervo Ranch. I already have a giant wine stain on the front of it, which I think is just a telling, wonderful omen of good things to come. But this is the Nervo Ranch Heritage. This is a red blend. Go ahead and grab that, put that in your glass. You can put that in a Bordeaux glass. You can put it in a Burgundy glass. You can put it in a universal wine glass. I'll tell you why when we come back in just a second. All right, you guys, in your glass, you should have the Bedrock Nervo Ranch Heritage Red Blend. I will not play favorites with the wines that I select. However, this was a special request that I made for this podcast shipment because I've been dying to get a bottle of Bedrock in this shipment for you guys, really ever since we had Antonio Galloni on the podcast, probably 2 or 3 years ago. When we had him on that show, normally we select the wines for our guest. But in that case, given that he's, Antonio Galloni, we thought, let's let this guy decide. So we did. And interestingly, his choice, despite every other selection that we had on the site, and this includes, way more expensive wines that he had access to, he chose the Bedrock wine. And I thought that was a really, really telling thing. I thought that was a really interesting choice. And we learned a lot about that wine. And ever since then, it's sort of, it was always on my radar, but it's become even more so on my radar. And so when we were thinking about wines that we wanted for this particular shipment, I said, I really want Bedrock to be a part of this, especially if we're going to be focusing on farming. And we'll get into why that is in just a second. So let me tell you a little bit about what is happening in this wine right now. Interestingly, Bedrock, if you know nothing about Bedrock, what you should know is that 80% of the vines that the Bedrock team works with are at least 80 years old. This is a project from Morgan Twain Peterson, the son of legendary Zinfandel maker Joel Peterson of Ravenswood. He's also an MW and was the San Francisco Chronicle's 2014 co-winemaker of the year. 1896, that is when the oldest vines that are in your glass right here date back to. It was planted into steep slopes at about 25 to 35 degrees of decomposed shale. And the reason why I said you can pretty much put this in any wine glass you want is the following. It is comprised of Zinfandel, Petit Syrah, Negrette, Alicante Bouschet, Carignan, Grenache, Grand Noir, Trousseau Noir, Valdiguet, Aborio, Semillon, Burger, Chenin Blanc, Sauvignon Blanc, and more. If you missed a handful of those, no worries. This is a true blend, sort of harking back to pre-Prohibition 1800s, late 1800s styles of winemaking where you very much had a field blend. And that's what's happening in your glass here. And because you have so many grapes happening in one wine, I don't think there is a wrong glass for this wine. And the only thing I would say is, make it a bigger one. Don't put it in a champagne flute. I want to talk a little bit about this wine and some of the farming practices and how it relates back to this wine. And I first just want to say and remind everyone that farming isn't just farming, right? Anyone who's attempted to grow a tomato and who's done like 10 minutes worth of research will know that it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. There's many schools of thought. And before we get deep into this conversation, I just want to remind everyone that this is one of those schools of thought that I'm going to be asking our guest about. Farming is a moving target. And I say that because the first place I want to start, Caleb, and I know you've worked a little bit with this vineyard, is this idea of old vines. Is it a thing? I know we don't have, a real definition of it in the US. It does tend to be a word that gets used a bit judiciously, but old vines, especially in the context of them being 50 plus years old, what do you think that means? And do you think it has an impact on the wine?
Absolutely. I think there's a consistency component to old vine vineyards that as root systems develop, as more and more vintages pass, the vines themselves evolve to become even deeper parts of the landscape, and they're able to adapt to all sorts of different situations. I wouldn't say always better, but they're able to basically remain consistent year in, year out, especially with old vine Zinfandel, old vine Petit Syrah. You'll find cluster size tends to normalize. And the fluctuations you see with young vines in terms of very wet years or very dry years have a major impact on cluster morphology, major impact on canopy development. You still see impacts on old vines. You still see impacts of droughts and all sorts of issues like that. But they tend to be moderated by older vines, mediated by older vines in a much more controlled and predictable fashion. One of the other reasons that vines tend to stay in the ground as long as they do, because they've produced compelling wines for quite a long time. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't be long for this earth. So replants happen. Vineyards that aren't performing don't necessarily have the opportunity to stay in the ground for a long time. But when you have something that is consistently making great wines year in, year out, everyone is trying to keep those vines in the ground for as long as possible. There is absolutely something to older vines, their resiliency, their integration with the environment, and their consistency year in, year out. And I think you taste it in this wine. It's funny, right? So this wine, which is a field blend, you get the consistency factor from the old vines, but you also get some of the dynamic character of all the field blends in there. I remember sampling this vineyard while I was working back at Ridge on these really steep slopes that are mentioned in the description, about 30% slopes. And it's true. I remember sampling and not paying attention. Part of sampling is that you really do want to kind of not think about what you're grabbing, if you will.
Right.
So you want it to be a random, great representation. So you pop in, grab a sample from this vineyard, the other, this vine, the next vine. And when you hit Alicante Bouschet, which is a Tenturi, a grape that has red juice as opposed to clear juice, you look at your hand and you went, oh my God, what happened? What did I just grab? But it's part of the beautiful complexity, the tapestry of a wine like this. So you get the consistency element from old vines, but you also get the field blend element, which really helps to create some amazing complexity. It's almost hard to say, this is a Zinfandel dominant wine, because there's so many other stone fruits, other flavors in there that are just kind of dancing around in this glass.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you were to blind taste this wine, you would probably be in like the Zinfandel camp, but you'd be very confused about what else is going on there, because it's clearly not purely Zinfandel. And I say that I think it leans in the Zinfandel camp because it has that very juicy, peppery, intensely fruity, but slightly softer tannin. But then there's like all of these other like umami things going on. There's like the spice coming from other elements. You get this juice, like real juiciness from the Alicante Bouschet. I love that you reminded us all of the word that we always forget, Tenturi. So this idea, we've talked about before that all grape juice is clear, but and I say 99.9% of all grape juice is clear, because there's a few exceptions, and Alicante Bouschet is one of them. If you squeeze it, it's red juice that comes out. And I think, this wine, it definitely lends itself to this idea of like old California heritage, where it's very easy drinking. There's intense complexity, but not in a way that really forces you to think. It's just like, oh, it's not as simple as you think it is. And I didn't even say what kind of glass you've got this in.
Oh, I've got it, unfortunately, in just a stemless
perfect.
Bordeaux glass right now. So it's working out perfectly for us here.
I actually have a stemless for the frog's leaf, which we also have as well.
Wonderful.
I want to go back to this idea of old vines a little bit. I love, the very technical approach, technical description of old vines. But I think it begs the question for those who are wondering, in Napa Valley, we hear Cabernet Sauvignon vines, not really seeing a lot of those into the upper echelon of age, right? Usually capped out at about 25 years. Why would that be?
Yeah, it's interesting, the evolution of farming here in Napa and going back and forth in terms of, trellis systems are changing quite rapidly here in Napa, which is really cool. In the 90s, there was a push to go a little bit tighter spacing, tighter density. So we saw a lot of vineyards planted with maybe 6 feet or less between the vine rows, and canopies that were kind of smushed together in a very tight VSP, which can have issues with heat exposure in terms of too much sun on the fruit, too much direct exposure to the fruit zone. And you'll have instances of basically not as great pigmentation as you'd like to see. Anthocyanins can sometimes suffer and things of that nature. Diseases always have an issue or play a part as well. If you have rampant leaf roll virus or red blotch or other types of things that move through vineyards, you'll tend to see those vineyards also be replanted, because there's really no cure for some of those diseases. So not that they're exceptionally rampant and all over the place, but Cabernet Sauvignon does not have the same level of resiliency to certain wood diseases as well. And by wood diseases, I mean pathogens that can get into the grapevine wood itself. Usually during pruning, this occurs during rain events, and a fungal pathogen will land on a fresh pruning wound, and they'll start to deteriorate the wood. So ESCA but Botryophyria, there's a few other diseases that can have an impact, especially on Cabernet Sauvignon. So generally, and this isn't all across the board because there are some lovely old vine vineyards in Napa to this day.
One we just mentioned.
We talked about the Scarecrow vineyard, the old men, they're called, planted, I believe, in 1945, which is just remarkable. But the productivity tends to go down slightly in vineyards as they age. And with Cabernet Sauvignon, you see that more so than you'll see that in Zinfandel vineyards or some of the mixed field blend vineyard varieties that you see. So there's kind of just been a general plan. A lot of vineyards kind of get to about 25, 30 years old. And on an estate that has any size, you'll start to see a redevelopment plan put in place where a certain percentage of the vineyard will start to be turned over year after year, as opposed to waiting until the moment when you're in a tight spot, if you will, and too much of the vineyard is non-productive, missing vines, things like that. We are seeing a trend, though, for replanting within vineyards, which is more of the European model. So instead of removing an entire vineyard and replanting, a lot of drip systems are putting in specifically to keep the young vines going within a larger vineyard. And that has multiple benefits from a quality perspective on the older vines, as well as you can use those drip systems to irrigate specific sections based on soil types, as well as the young vines that you've planted. So there's a lot of really interesting ways that you can kind of look at the whole redevelopment opportunity within a vineyard. And I think a lot of innovation occurs here. And it's something of like the California innovative way to always be improving and finding the next opportunity to plant. So the goal, though, for all of us is to plant a vineyard that outlasts ourselves. Right. That's really what we're trying to do.
Do you see, and I guess one place we should maybe touch on is this idea of rootstock. Do you see vineyards trying to push past that 25 to 30 years and trying to find ways, in addition to just, interplant or replanting individual vines? Do you see them making a push towards getting more longevity out of their vines?
Absolutely. I see this with a lot of selections going towards more drought resilient and higher vigor rootstocks. For the most part, that's not a blanket statement, but you see a lot of vineyards where we're actually trying to grow vines that are slightly larger than the versions prior. And these vineyards tend to have more resilience to root knot nematodes and nematodes in general. So tiny, basically roundworms, if you will, that are all over the soil. There's all sorts of different microbes in the soil, bacteria in the soil, and then nematodes in the soil. So a lot of the rootstocks will actually outperform or outgrow some of the issues that you see that can hamper growth or hamper productivity. So we're seeing a lot of trends towards stronger, somewhat larger vines, the ability to produce a larger canopy, which is going to translate to more resiliency as we move forward through all sorts of shifts in climate and shifts in ripening schedules that we're noting here as well.
I want to take it all the way back to basics because I realize I threw out this word rootstock, and a lot of people do not know how a grapevine grows and what goes into planting a vineyard. So can you just sort of from a macro level talk about how a vineyard is planted and where rootstock is falling into that, and how different decisions about various things can impact the planting? I know that's a hugely loaded question that there's a lot of answers to, but if you were just explaining how to plant a vineyard, I think it would be really helpful to give that sort of macro bird's eye view.
A lot of research and background investigation goes into planting any vineyard, especially with a place with land as valuable and with soils as incredible as what we have here in Napa. Generally, what will happen is that if you look at a vineyard that was planted prior, you can gain some real key insights as to how that vineyard performed, where there were weak spots, strong spots, potentially where there are issues with drainage, where there's issues with nutritional elements that may be off. And you can start doing what are called backhoe pits. I don't know if you've talked about backhoe pits on the podcast
Never.
in the past, but
please describe.
Essentially, it's a lens to look into the vineyard and into the soil to make sure that you're choosing rootstocks, which are a part of the part of the plant that actually interact with the soil, that are not the same as Vitis vinifera, which is pretty fascinating. It's due to a pest called phylloxera that we all have to plant on rootstocks. But these soil pits essentially allow you to get a look at compaction, look at gravel content, look at mottling, which is potential of too much water in overly saturated soils. So you really have to do this deep investigation and kind of map out what your soils look like to have a successful plan for planting. After that point, you generally get some larger equipment in and rip the soil and add amendments. Compost is standard. There are no operations that I know of that go out and do a redevelopment plan without putting, I'd say minimum 5 tons per acre of compost, which sounds like a lot. But when you put out 5 tons per acre, you barely notice it because it's spread over, evenly over the whole surface of the soil, and you barely see it. But that's incorporated in. Generally, the soil is ripped to a depth of sometimes 3 feet, I'd say would be a standard, but depending on scenarios, if you're trying to break up really hard sections of the soil, you can go even deeper. Once that soil is prepared and ready to be planted, then you put in your trellis system, your irrigation system, all the things that are the kind of the bones, the structure of the vineyard that can't really be changed in a major way. So those decisions are quite important as well in terms of your spacing between vines, and your rootstock selection is a big component of how close you're going to put your vines together or far apart. Lower vigor vines tend to be planted closer together because you don't want to overextend the canopy. Higher vigor vines that can produce more growth, it's based on the genetics of the rootstock and the genetics of the Vitis vinifera scion as well. So the rootstock is the section that sits at the bottom of the plant, and you'll see what's called a graft union, which is where the cambium layers of both the scion, which is Vitis vinifera, and the rootstock fuse together. They kind of create a bit of a node, if you will, or a bulge where that integration has taken place.
We've talked about Vitis vinifera before in the podcast. Rootstock you've just explained, but the Vitis vinifera part is really where you're deciding what the grape varietal is going to be. That's your Cabernet Sauvignon, your Pinot Noir, your Sauvignon Blanc. That is decided in this Vitis vinifera that's getting grafted onto the rootstock. So when you hear about, and I'm pushing ahead a little bit too much, but when you hear about people grafting over to something else, they are taking away the Vitis vinifera and grafting to something else, leaving the rootstock in place. Yes.
Well,
kind of
close.
Okay.
You can also top work Vitis vinifera and graft Vitis vinifera onto that. So say you have a 20-year-old vineyard that has rootstock and let's just call it Cabernet Sauvignon. Okay. And you decide that it's time to go graft to something that you might need in the winery in a larger amount. So Merlot, potentially, Petit Verdot, whatever it may be. Say you just need some more spice, some more elements. You can actually lop off the head of the vine and graft a bud. You can create a particular type of a cut into a plant. It opens up a small window called T-budding. There are other methods as well, chip budding. But you basically take a dormant bud, usually in May you can do this, and you slip it in a particular way. And there are skilled grafting crews that travel all over the world to do this type of work because it's so important that it's done right. And you can have essentially now a 3-part plant. So you've got your rootstock at the bottom, you've got a trunk made of Cabernet Sauvignon, and then you have your new scion that's growing out of the bud that you just inserted, which becomes Merlot, Petit Verdot, whatever it may be. Okay. So that's generally the way that the top working or the top working, they call it, or grafting over is kind of considered. So trying to extend again, not pulling out the entire vineyard, which is kind of what we were talking about earlier, but switching varieties midstream, if you will, based on market conditions or whatever the winery is looking for, or perhaps it just wasn't a great match in the first place. And it was time to try a different clone that might have a different cluster architecture or something of that, some different flavor profile or something of that nature.
So you have your vineyard planted, usually to the rootstock, and just what you're going, if it's initial replant, and you've got it planted, let's say Cabernet Sauvignon, first vintage, first harvest, first viable harvest. What's going to happen in the next 5 years?
Yeah, usually you're getting your first fruit off the vineyard in about 3 years' time. So you're establishing the bones, the architecture of the vine after planting. So you have your rootstock selected, which is generally a cross between Vitis berlandieri, Vitis rupestris, and Vitis riparia. Not all three. There's different combinations that make these different crosses, or that have produced these different crosses that we use. There's usually about 10 to 12 that are kind of industry standard that work quite well for our area here in Napa. You'll hear things like St. George, which is 100% Vitis rupestris. You hear things like 1103, which is a cross between, I believe, rupestris and berlandieri. Could be wrong on that one. It's been a while since I've looked through my textbooks to make sure I'm up to speed on that, just to make sure. But these different crosses produce these different types of rootstocks that will then determine the vigor and some of the morphology and some of the nutrient transfer that you see from soil to vine. 3 years it takes to kind of build up a trunk and then to build out cordons on your trellis system. So essentially the arms of the vine. You can also cane prune. You can cane prune, which also kind of expedites a little bit the ability. You don't have to build as much of a permanent structure because you're laying a cane down on the wood every year as opposed to a cordon with spurs. But yeah, 3 years. And then by year 5, you kind of generally have most of your arms built out and the permanent structure done. And you can get into a little bit more of a consistent yield pattern based on the number of positions that you leave on the vine.
So 5 years is kind of your like, that's day one for like fruit that you could potentially use for wine.
Well, so that's a really interesting question because there's a lot of debate in terms of
it was a leading question.
Yeah, well done. Well done. First year crop can be absolutely phenomenal. And I think that we basically write it off, for a lot of different reasons, a lot of dogmatic reasons that this fruit doesn't really work, or it's too young of a vine, or the canopy's not in the right balance. The really important part, kind of the secret to all of viticulture, is essentially fruit zone light and heat management. If you're able to get enough leaves over the cluster, and if you're able to get enough light, dappled light into where there's a dynamic environment in the fruit zone, you can produce exceptionally phenomenal fruit from day one. And I've seen this in a lot of different vineyards where we've brought in the fruit. The quantity is a little bit challenging because if you're bringing in lower quantities and it's not able to fill a tank or whatever it may be, sometimes you have to make exceptions to that. But for the most part, the quality of the fruit, as long as the clusters are not overexposed and you're able to grow enough canopy to protect the clusters, can be quite phenomenal. And you see this in some stories of some older wines as well, that you hear winemakers saying, well, that was first year crop or that was second year crop. And you taste the wine and go, oh my God, that was phenomenal.
I know somebody's screaming into their phone right now going, the 69 Chapelet was second or third year fruit, right? One of the greatest wines ever made. So
yeah, absolutely. You hear those stories all the time. So that is changing too, which is really great, mainly because, of course, the value of everything that we're doing up here and all the effort that goes into growing grapes. You want to make sure that, the moment that you have any fruit coming off these vineyards, it's able to make it into exceptional programs. So yeah, the young vine dogmatic principle of the you can't really do anything with fruit from the, first year of cropping to the fifth year of cropping, I think is bogus. And it's nice to see some of those wines being made with fruit that are coming off on the younger side.
I want to transition into the farming choices that one would make. And I think it's a perfect opportunity to maybe jet into the Frog's Leap. This is a wine that is not part of the wine club, but I wanted to bring it in because, one, I know Frog's Leap has been a part of Harvest Stomp, at least in years past. And two, when we talk about organics, you can't talk about organics in Napa Valley without really talking about some of the first people to do it. Spotswood being, one of the first to be certified organic, Frog's Leap and John Williams being among those early adopters as well. How important, and I know that you've worked with not only organic, but also biodynamically farmed vineyards. How important is organic farming? And I think the bigger question is, can you taste the difference?
So I have a couple of hats that I put on when I answer questions like this, because I speak on behalf of the entire Valley, the Napa Valley Grapegrowers in their entirety.
Yes.
And we talk about best practices, and we want to champion every type of growing practice that is essentially working for particular organizations or environments. But when I talk about some of the values that I had when I was working at a lot of these estates, organic farming is a way to champion the flavors in the vineyard that are coming off without using synthetic inputs. It's all built around building soil resilience and soil health, which I think is a kind of newer concept. We talked a little bit about tilling versus no tilling and how that impacts the soil. Just saying organic, I think, is a little too simplistic. And what we're seeing right now is organic kind of 2.0, or people that are thinking about farming and integrating a lot of organic practices that work for organic systems into whatever methodology of farming that they actually use. So compost applications are ubiquitous in Napa, which is outstanding. So usually people are on a cycle of every 1 to 3 years or 3 to 5 years or something of that nature. They're going out with compost applications to try and boost the kind of the resiliency, the organic matter, and some of the vitality of the soils. But to get back to your question about, is it important? Yes, it is important. Can you taste the difference? That's up for debate. I think. I don't think I don't think I would be able to say that I have the experience tasting through a bunch of different organic and non-organic wines to be able to say, yeah, I can taste the difference. I can't taste the difference. But what I do know is when I'm out working in the vineyards and we see what we're doing on the farming side, you just feel like you have a perception of what you're doing and what you're farming with that is a little bit different and unique. And you know that your tools are a bit more limited, so you have to be on your timing just exceptionally closely. So For powdery mildew control, for instance, which is one of the biggest diseases that we deal with every year, organic materials don't work for as long or as generally are as effective in some instances as some of the synthetic materials. So you have to be on your schedule in terms of getting out and using the materials that you have in the organic arsenal versus the synthetic arsenal at the perfect timing. So you kind of have, you need to be out in the vineyard and monitoring much more closely in organic systems. And I will also say that parts of the valley are really, I won't ever use the word easy. There's no such thing as easy in farming, but more easily adaptable to organic farming practices. So generally in the northern reaches of Napa, organic farming tend to be a little bit less challenging than, say, Carneros, especially due to the mildew pressure and some of the pressures with insects that we see from time to time too.
Right. I mean, I was just in the Finger Lakes a couple weeks ago, and I don't know that anyone is really farming organically there. The pressures are just too high in the Finger Lakes with all of the moisture.
Downy
yeah,
mildew.
Exactly.
Downy mildew, all sorts of different plagues and things like that. And there are some that are using, and this is where I like to talk about, if you're able to use organic practices, but also understand their limitations, I think that's really important to know as well, because we all have to make sure at the end of the day, we have amazing grapes to harvest and get into the winery to actually create these incredible wines. There's so many operations up here that are using organic practices and are also not certified or organic all the way through and just haven't gone through the certification process all the way through. And that's a personal and operational decision from any standpoint. And I have just as much respect and think that those folks that are doing it that way are also incredibly thoughtful in terms of their growing practices and are creating amazing wines too. So I think there's room for all sorts of different types of growing operations. It's really inspiring to see acreage increase. The Tokalon Vineyard, farmed by Constellation, that section just went to certified organic, which is an incredible vineyard and actually a much larger operation to go that direction. So it's great to see that happening on a lot of different fronts.
Also, just to clarify, we're specifically talking about organic farming, not organic winemaking. There is a distinction to be made there. And I think we've talked about that on previous podcasts. The other thing that I just always like to make mention of is this idea of sustainability. And when we're talking about organics, and I think you had alluded to it earlier, when you have to make multiple passes on an organically farmed vineyard, because these vines have to be treated so frequently, you have to take into consideration all of the emissions that you're putting out, the manpower that it takes to do things like that. You're not making these decisions in a bubble. It's not just let's do this one thing and nothing else will be affected. There's a lot of things to take into account. So it's not quite this simplistic approach. And I love seeing vineyards really looking at the whole ethos of what they're doing in terms of not just not using synthetics or choosing to use conventional farming, but also how that impacts, the vineyard as a whole, and also the people that are managing it.
Yeah, I think that brings up a really amazing insight in that, and they're kind of alluding to the Organics 2.0. There was organics when it first came out, in a sense, and a lot of people just looked at it as a substitution, right? Well, I can't use that, but now I can use this. And that substitution just meant that you had to go out and do a lot more passes, and these materials just don't work as much. So here you go. Now we're working with companies that are looking at actual spores floating around in the air, which is a new technology that we really haven't worked with. Monica Cooper here has done this for years, building her own traps. Dr. Monica Cooper, our farm advisor for viticulture here in Napa County. She's an amazing asset and just an amazing human being for our entire benefit of our entire valley. But we're looking at things scientifically, and we're making sure that even if you are an organic farming practice, you're not going out and doing things that are harmful or necessarily not necessary for the environment and for the vineyard. So that's the 2.0 part where, it's not just substitution, but it's growing resilient vineyards. It's using the right rootstock. It's making sure that you're kind of pre-programming success into a farming operation. It's utilizing things like beneficial insects to a larger degree. So instead of having to go out and use some type of insecticide, whether it's organic or not organic, you can actually use insects that you can purchase from an insectary, bring them out to the vineyard, and they'll start moderating pest populations without you even knowing. You're kind of asleep at night and the insects keep going, keep going. So there's all these different tools and techniques to kind of up-level organic farming into a holistic and, getting into the word a little bit more regenerative.
Yeah.
It's something that I think we're all still working on defining ourselves, and there's new certifications out there that are regenerative. But what we're looking at with regenerative is essentially systems that kind of get close to the biodynamic mindset as well, which is sourcing materials really close to home, making sure that you're paying attention to your soils. Compost is part of the process. All these are kind of intertwining, and they're all moving towards a really positive farming system that is way less taxing on our environment and on our people, and creating wines of great distinction and site specificity at the same time.
Have you seen the documentary Biggest Little Farm?
Yes, I believe so. The one down in Santa Barbara County, right?
Yeah, if anyone hasn't seen it, I think this is a great one to watch, especially if, I love the example of Dr. Monica Cooper and bringing in the insects. But if you watch Biggest Little Farm, I think if you want to understand farming, at least from this aspect of it, a lot of what they deal with is dealing with obviously natural predators and dealing with them in a natural way. And you see how difficult it is, but all of the different routes that they take to basically arrive at the place that they want to be. So I think if you're listening to this and you find this fascinating, it's a documentary to pick up and watch. I know we're getting close to time. I don't think I mentioned that we're drinking the Frog's Leap Zinfandel if anyone wants to drink with us. It's delicious. And I will also mention that this is bolstered with Petit Syrah and carrying on as it always is, because Petit Syrah helps to bring out color. And I think there's a binding agent or something with Zinfandel. It's very delicious. I recommend it. It's one of my favorites. It's also, people don't talk about Zinfandel and Zinfandel blends as being age-worthy wines. They are. I've had, especially like the old Ravenswood Zinfandels. I've had them all the way back to the late 80s, early 90s. Incredible wines. And I think both of these wines represent ageability if you want to travel down that path. I have one last question for you. I think it might be a challenging one, but I think you're up for it. What are some things that you're doing in the vineyard that impact the wine that people might be surprised to know?
So some of the newest technology that we're working with, the newest practices that we're working with are essentially cooling vineyards or positioning vineyards to make sure that heat is not playing an overly impactful impact on the quality of the fruit. So there's a concept called evaporative cooling, and you guys have everyone out there that has walked by a mister on a hot day has felt this, but misting systems out in the vineyard are something that we're using to essentially mitigate some of the hot and dry weather that we're experiencing from time to time. And I'm talking like really extreme events. So say you're at 100 degrees Fahrenheit, but you're also at something like 10% humidity, which is interesting because that can happen in the North Coast from time to time. You get these really hot, dry events that come through, sometimes with stagnant air and sometimes with wind, which is even more challenging. So one of the methods to mitigate some of that is by not just simply irrigating and putting water into the soil, which the vines are taking care of themselves. And, we're drinking a dry farmed wine in this Frog's Leap wine. They're absolutely able to moderate the amount of water that they're using on hot, dry events to make sure they don't use everything and then essentially hit a point in which they're starting to defoliate and drop leaves to protect the fruit and protect the rest of the canopy. These misting systems are ejecting about 0.8 gallons of water per hour, which is a very small amount, into the air in a fine mist that essentially can draw heat out of the atmosphere and away from the plant. So it's the same concept. You're not really getting wet, if you will, and you don't really see the canopies getting wet, but you're cooling the environment. And I've seen examples of 10 degree Fahrenheit cooling and somewhere around 30% increase in humidity. So what this is doing is protecting the vine from both a stress standpoint. It's kind of like inducing fog in the vineyard, which is pretty cool.
That is very cool. I've never heard of this.
Yeah. And
where in Napa is this being used?
A lot of different sites are experimenting with this. A lot have been working with it for quite a long time. And there's kind of three different means to do this type of cooling with water. And again, it's not, I think people think about using water and they think immediately that water is being wasted, which I think is certainly not what I'd want to say or not what I truly believe with these types of systems. They're only turned on during the peak hours of heat when we know that there's potential for damage in the clusters and in the vines themselves. So they run for a short amount of time. They don't use more water than a traditional drip system does. And you can do pulsing techniques. So an overhead frost protection system. So usually these systems are used during the frost season where water will actually, or ice will encapsulate and protect, very tender flesh, tender vine tissue from freezing essentially. But you can use those same systems in the heat of the summer to protect the canopies or protect the fruit from overheating. You only have to run them for about 15 minutes or so, 15 to 30 minutes every hour, and you get an incredible impact of cooling of the overall environment. So there's a lot of different techniques kind of on the technology in terms of mitigating climate on that front that I think would be fascinating for your listeners and viewers to dive into.
That is fascinating,
especially here in Napa.
Yeah, and what is it called again? Evaporative cooling.
Evaporative cooling, yeah. So it's not trying to spray water on the vines or on the clusters themselves. It's emitting this vapor, these really small microns into the air that essentially kind of, if you will, absorb some of the heat because they have such a small droplet size, and then they rise up, pulling the heat with them as hot air and kind of the hot moisture rises. So you kind of like pull heat away from the canopy and the clusters, if you will, which is it's really fascinating. Yeah.
Absolutely fascinating. All right. Well, next time I'm out in Napa, I will definitely be looking for that.
We'll throw a misting system on for you.
I would like an evaporative cooling system myself. Caleb, this has been wildly informative. Probably a lot that a lot of people have never heard before. Some refreshers for others. I know there was a lot that is new to me. So if this is a podcast that went a little over your head, consider re-listening. Shoot me a DM. If you have further questions, please DM us and we will relay those questions to the experts and get you answers. But I really hope that you guys enjoyed this show. I hope that it was helpful. And I also want to remind everyone who is listening in 2024 in August that Harvest Stomp is just around the corner. We mentioned earlier all of the ELOTs, but what we didn't mention is if you are not obviously able to join us for Harvest Stomp, there are live auction lots and there are proxy bidders available for that, correct?
Yeah, so you can register at harveststomp.com. There's a proxy bid link that you can take a look at, and we'll have the live auction items up, I believe, the week of the 17th, so they could be previewed. You can see what we have. The live auction will occur at Harvest Stomp on the 24th, so you have to be ready to rock and roll at that point in time. But we have such incredible lots. Screaming Eagle has been incredibly generous with us for a long, long time. We have an amazing package from them, an amazing package for a estate, the Howard Backen House up on Pritchard Hill.
Oh my gosh, that's my dream house.
It's an unbelievable estate, and it's the package is loaded with tours and tastings of all the amazing Pritchard Hill wineries. So I really think you get an opportunity, please check out the website, take a look at all the e-auction packages, take a look at the live auction packages. It's going to be an incredible opportunity to see what we do here, to see how people, the land, the vines and the wines interact with one another to make Napa Valley the amazing place that it is.
They're all connected and you can be a part of it. Caleb, thank you so, so much. To everyone listening, if you love this podcast, we would love you to leave us a little review. A 5-star one is always preferred. And if you were not drinking with us on this episode, this is your reminder to subscribe to the Wine Access Unfiltered Podcast Wine Club. It's 4 wines about every other month. It's $120 plus tax, but it includes shipping. And you're always getting 10% off of your Wine Access purchases, of which I make many. So there is some girl math in there to be had, I think. Caleb, thank you so much for being with us. It's great to see you. I can't wait to see you in a few weeks at Stomp. And until then, cheers to you and all the great work you're doing with the grape growers.
Thank you. And thank you to Wine Access so much for this incredible opportunity. We're so, so thankful.
Pleasure is ours. Thank you.